Here's my story. Growing up, I've always been interested in the paranormal, the unexplained. I think as children we all were. I had different experiences as a child that I was certain were real, but then I grew up and looked back at those times and laughed and tried to rationalize them as something else. I've always been very intuitive, and my father believes he is the same way. I feel more than others do and can really sense energy from people and locations and environments. I've always felt like I have had a greater understanding of life than most people and have been a firm believer in destiny and that our stories have already been written for us and we think we have life choices, but in reality, we are just living our stories just as they were written. The thing about it though is I've always gotten signs throughout my life, what I have come to know now as synchronicity. And usually there are words I've never heard before in my life that all of a sudden just reoccur multiple times out of nowhere within a few days or so, whether it be on the TV, the radio, hearing it from a friend or a family member or a coworker. And whenever that happens, I know that I'm in the right place at the right time and that I'm meant to be in that exact spot in my life. It is kind of a strange, odd, and eerie feeling, but also a loving and welcoming feeling at the same time because when these things happen, I just know I'm on the right path towards my future. Anyways, here's my story. Call it a coincidence, call it crazy. I don't know what it was. I have a feeling I know what it was, but either way, these are the facts, and there's no denying what happened. I once was a fairly closed-minded guy when it came to these type of things. It was kind of like, I'm not saying I don't believe, but I haven't seen anything, or I'll believe it when I experience it for myself. You know, that kind of a thing. Anyways, here's my story. It was back in 2016. I was on Facebook and an interesting article came on my newsfeed from a friend who had shared it. It was about a haunted cemetery called Spadra in Pomona, California. At the time, I lived in San Dimas, just 10 minutes from there, so I was immediately intrigued that I had never heard of this place, especially considering the fact that I've lived there almost my entire life. It was an article written by Strange Ways, a paranormal Facebook page. Sadly, they have since deleted their account. What also intrigued me was the fact that the story was written by a Cal Poly Pomona alumni, from her point of view and telling her stories as she recalled them. She had wild stories on her Reddit account about her stories at the cemetery and the things she encountered. And what a coincidence, because at that time I was anticipating going to Cal Poly that following fall quarter. Anyways, I was immediately hooked. I would even say obsessed. I started talking about the place and told my girlfriend all about it. She came over and we both were very interested and we were researching all about it and came across a lot of cool local history from the late 1800s and stuff. We stayed up until like 4 a.m. one night and found out about a lot, the history of my land, my area, but to keep the story shorter, I won't go super into detail on all the dates and facts and stuff. You can look that up for yourself. Anyways, in that Strange Ways article, they mentioned of a man who was buried there and not to mess with him. He was a badass, a Wild West outlaw. He murdered a few people and never went to jail. He is literally the founder of the Pomona area, which at that time was known as Spadra. Everyone knew him. They also knew not to mess with him, and the same goes for now. The article says not to mess with his grave and stuff because he is an evil spirit who doesn't take lightly to it. Basically, don't joke around with him. His name is Uncle Billy Rubottom. And honestly, I don't even like saying his name or writing it or anything. It kind of creeps me out. Anyways, after our research, days went by, and that's what me and my girlfriend would talk about constantly. We couldn't get over it. Everything about it was so intriguing. One day I dropped my girlfriend off at home and she decided to mess with me, and as I drove off, she texted me, "I saw Rubottom in the back seat with you." At the time, I was still in that closed-minded mindset, so I texted back, "I am Rubottom," and I think that's where we went wrong. Then a few more days go by and a friend/neighbor of mine was really interested too. We decided, let's get a group and go. Upon my research, I found that Rubottom was also the creator of a restaurant in Rancho, Cucamonga called Sycamore Inn. It's still there to this day, And that place, man, is a whole nother story in itself with so much fascinating history. And it was founded in 1848. Anyways, the date was set. We were going to the cemetery on a Sunday night around 9 p.m. Me and my girlfriend decided that before we met up with my friends at the cemetery, that we would eat at his restaurant first and make a night out of it. I had made a reservation for 7 p.m., so we were good to go and the plans were set. Anyways, it was a normal day. I had work, I got home, she came over. We were getting intimate and then we started laying down watching TV. We decided that we would take a little nap before we got ready to go to the restaurant. I told her to set the alarm for 6 p.m., so that way we had about an hour to get ready and go to the restaurant. And then we fell asleep for like an hour or so. Anyway, 6 p.m. hit, the alarm went off, and that's all I remember. I remember hearing the alarm and immediately getting up and going to the restroom. It's weird because I'm usually pretty slow at getting up after an alarm. That's all I remember. Then the story is just what I've been told, with bits and pieces of me coming in and out of consciousness. My girlfriend said she heard a loud thump and bang in the restroom. She knows I'm a prankster, so thought nothing of it until she called me once, then twice, and I didn't answer. She called me a third time, and then she started to worry and went in to check on me in the bathroom, and I was on the floor having a seizure. She didn't know what to do, so she called my parents into the restroom. They called 911 and the paramedics were on their way. And I can only imagine how scary it was for especially my parents to see their naked 24-year-old son having a seizure on the bathroom floor. Eventually I stopped, they managed to put some shorts on me, and then I just remember sitting in the living room with two paramedics in my face, asking me if I knew my name, what year it was, where I was at. I had a hard time thinking and answering questions. It felt like I was in and out of reality. Then I remember being pushed on the stretcher into the back of the ambulance. I was becoming more conscious with every moment. At that point, I remember looking at my parents and my girlfriend, and they all had this sad, disappointed look on their faces. I didn't know what happened, why this was happening. At that point, I assumed I drank a whole bottle of liquor or something and passed out, and that they were all upset with me. Then I don't really remember the ambulance ride. I don't really remember checking in to the hospital or anything. I do remember waiting in line at the hospital for a long time, trying to get a room. And that's when my family showed up while I was waiting, sitting upward in the stretcher. It was at that point when I'm asking them what happened, what's happening. I'll never forget. That's when my girlfriend looked me in my eyes with all seriousness and said, "Daniel, we were supposed to go to the cemetery tonight, and you randomly had a seizure right before we were about to go." Boom, it all hit me like a ton of bricks. My memory was coming back and I was tripping out. I didn't know what to say, but I wanted to tell everyone. I felt and knew that I had just had some kind of strange paranormal experience. Hours go by and I was able to go home. Call it a coincidence, call it what you want, but something didn't want me going to the cemetery that night. Something kept me from going, and it was the strangest experience of my life. After that, I had so many appointments at Kaiser in Baldwin Park. I had an EEG done on my brain and an MRI, and none of the doctors could give me a logical reason as to why this happened to me. I have no history of seizures and no genetic history of them either. All of my tests were good. I was a healthy 24-year-old, and the only conclusion they could give me was my 5 hours of sleep the night before. I also had DMV appointments at one of their corporate offices and had like a mini hearing where they wanted to interview me and provide paperwork and documentation to ensure that I was still good to drive. It was such a random occurrence, so I provided everything they needed, and it was decided that I was still good to drive. I was given a doctor's note and was recommended to take off a couple of weeks from work and upon my return take light duties. Months went by and I finally started at Cal Poly Pomona, and I see signs of it today. On the 57 freeway southbound, just before you hit Temple Avenue, there's a small sign that says Spadra, and down the street from Cal Poly, we have a farm with a big banner that says Spadra Farm and Cal Poly Pomona's Agricultural Center. Off campus, we have a brewery, And it tripped me out that my first time there I noticed on the beer menu that they had a beer named after Rubottom called Rubottom's Red. Even at Alosta Brewing in Covina, they have a beer called Spadra IPA, and of course back then when I was drinking, I had to try them both. It's been 8 years since then, and so many strange things have happened. When I moved out from home, I ended up moving to the University Village right across from Cal Poly Pomona, and when I graduated, I ended up working as the marketing assistant for the brewery right across the street as well. Also, after I graduated, I've been living in the same area, the Phillips Ranch area of Pomona. As you will see later in this video, the name Phillips is very important as well. I can't help but feel that something keeps drawing me to the land and to this area. I also had a horrific car accident in the rain one day in 2018 coming down the 57 South Freeway near the Temple Avenue exit, near that Spadra sign. At the time, I thought I was possessed or cursed, but what I have come to realize now is that it's actually quite the opposite. I have been divinely protected on too many occasions in my life, and these are the top two. Something protected me from going to the cemetery that night, especially with how sensitive I am to energy. And the car accident was pretty bad, and I flipped upside down, and I came out of it completely fine. Once again, I can only feel like I was divinely protected, and I get a bit emotional about it because these were actually very traumatic experiences and caused a lot of frustration and confusion in my life, but I can't help but feel so protected, so blessed, and so loved. These experiences were so strange that they changed my view of the world, and it all led me to my spiritual awakening. Sometimes I doubt all of it, but then when I think about these experiences, I really can't help but feel that my intuition is right. Like I'm always saying, this reality is so mysterious and so magical, and when you open your eyes to it, you wake up out of your slumber. And I understand the skeptics. I once was a skeptic myself too, and I still am to a degree. But once you have these kinds of experiences, you're no longer a skeptic or a believer. You just become a knower. So the history is there, the stories all add up, and even in today's present day, the signs are still here. I still have been too scared to go over there to the cemetery. I took it as an eye-opener to steer away from the place and all things paranormal. But I can't help it, it's just too interesting for me. I thought I would share my story as to any insight, or even to open people's minds to the idea, and to prepare them for the unexpected. I still haven't been to the cemetery. The closest I've gotten is just outside the fence by the Phillips mansion. And to all those interested, do your research first, be cautious, but at all times be respectful to the spirits and to the unknown. There is something about this place and this area. I don't know what it is. What do you think? Were these just random events, or was it something more? As I mentioned earlier, I fell victim to the false narrative about Uncle Billy Rubottom. After all these years and further research, I now see Uncle Billy in a new light and will provide the anecdotes of first-hand accounts to give him the credit he deserves. For some reason, I feel called to do so. Listen in as I explore the town once called Spadra and some of its key figures. There is way too much research and things that I could get into, as early California has a deep history with so many fascinating stories. Maybe this video will motivate and encourage you to explore it on your own. With that said, I will briefly explore Uncle Billy Rubottom, Louis Phillips, the Fryer family, John Raines, Doña Merced, the Sycamore Inn, and the history of Spadra. Spadra was originally founded in the mid-19th century and was one of the earliest settlements in what is now the Pomona Valley. It was once a bustling stagecoach stop and trading post on the way to Los Angeles, but it gradually became a ghost town as larger cities like Pomona grew around it. As the railroad came through the region in the late 19th century, Spadra's importance as a stagecoach stop dwindled. The rise of Pomona as a central city, coupled with the railroad's development, led to Spadra's decline, and by the early 20th century, it was essentially abandoned. One of the most enduring and eerie reminders of Spadra is its cemetery, which still exists today. the Spadra cemetery is often cited in local legends as a haunted location, adding to the town's ghostly mystique. Many of the early settlers, including Phillips and some of Rubottom's family members, are buried there. Today, Spadra is largely forgotten, but remnants like the Spadra cemetery and the stories of its colorful past live on. Many people believe that the area is haunted, and Spadra cemetery, in particular, has a reputation for ghost sightings and strange phenomena. The stories of Uncle Billy Rubottom, Lewis Phillips, and the Sycamore Inn add layers to the area's rich history and its association with the paranormal. This blend of early pioneer life, wealth, power struggles, and ghostly tales makes Spadra and the surrounding area a fascinating part of California's history. William Uncle Billy Rubottom was one of the most colorful and infamous early settlers of Spadra. Originally from Arkansas, Rubottom arrived in California during the gold rush, but eventually settled in the area now known as Pomona. He established a stagecoach, tavern, and hotel in Spadra, which made the settlement an important hub for travelers heading to Los Angeles. Rubottom had a reputation for being both a pioneer and a troublemaker. He was known for his involvement in local disputes and was rumored to be a violent character. Some sources claim he shot a man over a land dispute, which led to his brief imprisonment. Despite this, Rubottom was also seen as an enterprising figure who helped put Spadra on the map. While Uncle Billy Rubottom has long been cast as a villainous figure in Spadra's history, my further research suggests he's been given an undeserved bad reputation. In reality, many people seem to have admired him. After all, they called him Uncle Billy, a name that implies a certain level of affection and respect within the community. Why would a bad person have earned such a title? Yes, Rubottom may have been involved in a few violent confrontations, but we need to consider the context. This was the Wild West, a time when the sheriff's departments were still being created and law enforcement was minimal. In a land still being carved out of wilderness, people often took matters into their own hands. It was rough, and sometimes that meant settling disputes directly. These were different times, and his actions weren't out of place in that era. He helped build Spadra into a thriving settlement, providing vital services for travelers and locals. People who knew him likely understood his character better than the sensationalized accounts that have survived. Here's an excerpt I found online from the Foothills Reader, dated December 14th, 2014. Many feel that Uncle Billy atoned for his past sins twice, once when he saved his neighbor from a lynch mob, and when he spent his remaining years caring for the son of a man he killed. After being accused of freeing some fugitive slaves, his accusers came after him. One shot blew Rubottom's revolver out of bullets and tore into his abdomen. Rubottom quickly unsheathed his Bowie knife with his teeth and counterattacked his heavily armed assailants, quickly dispatching them. Rubottom opened the Trailside Inn, later known as the Sycamore Inn, in Rancho Cucamonga, along the stagecoach road that became Route 66. He then founded Spadra, the town that became the precursor to Pomona. On one account, a mob gathered in the Sycamore Inn to plot the lynching of Rancho Cucamonga owner John Rain's widow, Doña Merced, who was then considered complicit in the murder. Rubottom and his son James reportedly served the startled conspirators dinner and their weapons and sent them home. Stay tuned for more info on this story later. The other act of atonement for Uncle Billy's life began in the 1850s when his daughter Civility married a dashing young Army officer. He was a Mexican War veteran named Hilliard P. Dorsey. After their son Cuin was born in 1857, the marriage grew contentious, and it is believed that Hilliard may have been physically abusive to Civility. So she took her son and left to live with her father, Uncle Billy. Billy welcomed his daughter and grandson and warned Dorsey to leave her alone, yet Dorsey managed to take Cuin back to their home in San Gabriel. Civility responded by retrieving Cuin at an unguarded moment and returned to Rubottom's home once again. According to historian F.P. Brackett, when Hillard Dorsey returned to the house, Rubottom issued a stern warning, and Dorsey replied, "I'll have my wife or I'll die in the attempt." As Dorsey tossed a dueling pistol to Uncle Billy, the old man instinctively jerked his shotgun and killed his advancing son-in-law. Those who knew him best said that Uncle Billy always grieved for the man, wrote Brackett. Rubottom raised his grandson as his own until his health failed, and Cuin ended up caring for his grandfather in his declining years. I've also found some other very interesting information with real-life accounts of Billy Rubottom and his character by a man named Major Horace Bell in his book titled On the Old West Coast. Horace Bell was an important figure from the same era as Rubottom in early California history. He was a soldier, lawyer, journalist, and self-styled adventurer who played a key role in documenting the Wild West atmosphere of Southern California during the mid to late 19th century. Bell is most famous for his books Reminiscences of a Ranger in 1881 and On the Old West Coast, 1911, which are valuable first-hand accounts of life in California during this transformative period. Bell originally came to California during the Gold Rush and later joined the Los Angeles Rangers, a vigilante group formed to help enforce the law in the absence of an established police force. The Rangers often dealt with bandits, criminals, and other dangers in what was then a lawless region. Through his work with the Rangers, Bell witnessed many significant events and colorful characters from early California history, including figures like Uncle Billy Rubottom. Though his books contain plenty of dramatic storytelling, they also provide valuable historical insight. Bell had strong opinions about many of the people he encountered, and his writings often blended facts with the kind of exaggerations common in tales of the Wild West. His perspective gives us a glimpse into how lawlessness, power struggles, and conflicts with Native American tribes and Mexican communities shaped the Southern California region. Bell's writing was highly critical of the powerful elites in California, and he frequently depicted them as corrupt or villainous. This bias means that figures like Uncle Billy Rubottom, who found themselves often in conflict with the law or local authorities, may have been depicted more harshly than they actually deserved. Bell's accounts are an interesting mix of history and tall tales, reflecting the turbulent and sometimes mythologized Wild West. Bell described Uncle Billy Rubottom as a remarkable man, a pure specimen of character, honest and generous, despite being wholly illiterate. Bell admired Rubottom's strong sense of justice, noting that he was a lover of right and a hater of wrong. One of the most memorable stories Bell recounts is when Rubottom stood up against a group of men who were using a slave named Harry as collateral in their poker games. Week after week, Harry was passed around, forced into labor by different men. Rubottom, disgusted by the injustice, decided to intervene. He threw money on the poker table, declaring that he had enough of the nonsense. In a bold move, he asserted that, being in California, a free state, Harry was a free man just like anyone else. Rubottom took Harry into his camp, paid him for his work, and treated him as an equal. This act of defiance angered the men, who felt they had been robbed of their property. They later pursued legal action against Rubottom, which escalated into a violent confrontation. The men and one sheriff came after Rubottom and served him the paper and said there was a warrant out for his arrest over Harry's freedom. The sheriff demanded the men to capture Rubottom. Rubottom fought back and ended up killing the men in self-defense. This incident contributed to the eventual tensions that surrounded Uncle Billy in his later life. Horace Bell vividly recalls another tale that demonstrates Uncle Billy's sense of justice and loyalty. In this instance, Uncle Billy and his family had left camp, entrusting a companion named Mexican Joe with the task of watching over it until their return. Upon his return, however, Billy was horrified to find Joe hanging from an oak tree, gasping for his last breaths. Without hesitation, Billy sprang into action, cutting Joe down and saving his life. When Billy questioned the other miners, they claimed that some of their gold had gone missing, and assuming Joe was the thief, they decided to hang him, which was a brutal but common consequence for theft in the Wild West. Billy, certain that Joe would never betray him, he erupted with fury. He cursed the miners for their rash actions and swore that they should never repeat such an injustice again. Soon after the incident, a coyote was spotted running around camp with something in its mouth. The men shot the animal and, to their shock, found that the coyote had been carrying the very purse containing the missing gold. This revelation proved Joe's innocence and further solidified Rubottom's reputation as a man who stood fiercely by those he trusted, defending what was right no matter the circumstance. Louis Phillips was one of the wealthiest and most influential settlers in Spadra. A Jewish immigrant from Prussia, he came to California during the gold rush. Unlike Rubottom, Phillips struck success not through prospecting, but through cattle ranching and land acquisitions. He eventually purchased large tracts of land in and around Spadra, including much of what is now Pomona. His ranch became one of the largest and most prosperous in the area, and he soon became one of the wealthiest landowners in Southern California. Phillips's influence helped shape the future of the Pomona Valley. In fact, he played a key role in the transition of Spadra from a stagecoach town into a larger, more prosperous agricultural community. He is also one of the founding members of the Pomona College, one of the campuses of the Claremont Colleges in Claremont. He also has a section of Pomona named after him, and it is where I currently live, called Phillips Ranch. Most notably, his home, known as the Phillips Mansion, still stands today and is a historic site in front of the Spadra Cemetery and is currently owned by the Pomona Historical Society. The Fryer family was led by their patriarch, Richard C. Fryer, who was born in Dallas County and moved to Arkansas and then to California in about 1855. They had the following children: John, James, Jeremiah, Littleton, Henry, Francis, Louisa, Dixie, Earle, Nora, and Mary Ann. On May 14, 1870, a church was organized in the home of the Reverend and met in the Spadra schoolhouse from 1870 to 1883. 5 charter members attended the first meeting. In 1881, it was named Spadra Baptist Church. This church is now the Pomona First Baptist Church on the corner of Holt Boulevard and Gary Avenue in Pomona. Their significance is often tied to the development of the Spadra region and its integration into the larger Pomona area. However, their role is generally less well known than those of Rubottom and Phillips. This is another piece of the Spadra puzzle where I only feel that this family has a much deeper story than is documented. I sense some darkness about them and their family. The story of John Raines and Doña Merced is another story deeply intertwined with the history of the Sycamore Inn and the larger region of Southern California, including Rancho Cucamonga. Their tragic tale of love, wealth, and mysterious death has been connected to the Sycamore Inn's legacy, adding a layer of intrigue and even paranormal speculation to the inn's already rich history. John Raines, originally from Alabama, came to California in 1849 as a modest sheep herder. His fortunes changed when he married Doña Merced in 1856, making him one of the wealthiest men in Southern California. Doña Merced was the daughter of Isaac Don Julian Williams, the owner of Rancho Santa Ana del Chino, and her maternal lineage connected her to the powerful Lugo family. John Raines became a prominent landowner and rancher who acquired Rancho Cucamonga in 1858. He was a significant figure in the development of the area, making considerable investments in the land and establishing Rancho Cucamonga as a center for agriculture. John swindled Doña Merced out of her land inheritance and managed to get the land signed into his name. Together they lived a life of luxury on their vast ranch, which encompassed much of what is now modern-day Rancho Cucamonga. They were known for their grand house, hospitality, and the successful vineyard that John Rains established. Their home was a hub of social life for the region, with the Trailside Inn, later known as the Sycamore Inn, being one of the places where they would host and entertain. However, their life took a dark turn in 1862. John Rains was murdered under mysterious circumstances while traveling to Los Angeles. His body was found riddled with bullets on the side of the road. At the time, law enforcement was limited, and the frontier was rife with violence and unsolved crimes. Despite his elevated status, it is said that Rains was a poor businessman and took on heavy debts. The Civil War provided an opportunity to recover financially, and in November of 1862, Rains set out to Los Angeles to settle his affairs. He never arrived. A few days later, his horses returned to the rancho without him. After a search, his body was found near Mud Springs Stage Station, which is now San Dimas. His body was found shot multiple times and brutally mutilated. The murder was clearly premeditated, but the killer was never found. According to the Los Angeles Star, it appeared as if he had been lassoed and yanked from his wagon perch. His right arm was mangled from the elbow down, and its upper portion had been pulled out of its shoulder socket. He was shot twice in the back, once in the side, and on the left side of his chest. The murder of John Rains was never officially solved, though many theories swirled about who was responsible. Some suspected business rivals, others believed it was a bandit ambush, while others hinted at a personal vendetta. Regardless of the motive, Rains' death left Doña Merced a widow and the rightful owner of the vast Rancho Cucamonga estate. The murder of John Rains ignited a series of violent events. His brother-in-law, Robert Carlyle, led the investigation, but soon became a suspect himself. All suspects were proven innocent or ended up dying or in jail. All signs pointed to Carlyle as the man who sneakily diverted attention away from him because he was the one who actually committed the crime. More than a few locals held abiding suspicions that Rains' murder was none other than Robert Carlyle. On November 17, 1862, the day Rains disappeared, Carlyle was scheduled to be on hand in San Bernardino for his swearing in as one of San Bernardino County's newly elected supervisors. He departed from Rancho Santa Ana del Chino ostensibly to keep his appointment, but never showed up. He was never able to adequately explain his whereabouts on that day. During the week-long search for the missing Rains toward the end of November 1862, instead of staying in the wild along the road to Los Angeles to maintain a thorough scouring of the places Rains might have been, Carlyle returned to his home where one evening he held a festive party. Then there was the matter of his dealings with his sister-in-law after her husband's death. Carlyle hectored, bamboozled, and bullied Maria Merced into granting him power of attorney over the Rains estate. Carlyle, in looking after his sister-in-law's affairs, became deeply involved in the settlement of John Rains' estate. This led to a bitter dispute between the King brothers of El Monte and Los Angeles, with whom Rains had business dealings, including shared ownership of the Bella Union Hotel. The King brothers believed Carlyle had interfered with their business affairs in his management of his sister-in-law's estate. On July 5, 1865, more than 7 months after he had left the Board of Supervisors, Carlyle was in Los Angeles to attend a wedding at the Bella Union Hotel. In attendance at the party was Los Angeles County Under Sheriff Andrew King, one of the King brothers, who had been San Bernardino County's constable and whom Carlisle had accused of indolence in the investigation of Raines's murder. That night, in the crowded saloon on the ground floor of the hotel, there was a heated exchange between the two men, including a fight in which Carlisle pulled a knife and slashed King's arm. The next day, two of the King brothers, Houston and Frank, came into the hotel to confront Carlisle. A gunfight ensued. Carlisle was fatally wounded, but not before he had himself shot and killed Frank King. Carlisle died on the billiards table, and his funeral was held in the Bella Union. Houston King was charged with the murder of Carlisle. At Houston King's murder trial in 1866, he was acquitted. Adding to the intrigue, Raines's trusted advisor, Ramon Carrillo, was also murdered near Uncle Billy Rubottom's tavern, which is now the Sycamore Inn, in 1864, further entwining this tale with the area's dark history. After John's death, Doña Merced took over the operations of the Rancho, though she faced numerous legal battles and financial difficulties. Despite these struggles, she became a notable figure in Southern California, maintaining her status as a powerful woman in a male-dominated world. However, the loss of John Raines casted a long shadow over her life, and many believe that the tragedy affected her deeply. There have been suggestions that John Raines' murder and his unresolved death could be part of the paranormal lore surrounding the Sycamore Inn. As with many Old West figures who died under mysterious or violent circumstances, his spirit is said by some to haunt the areas he frequented in life, including the land surrounding Rancho Cucamonga. The tragic circumstances of his murder and the later struggles of Doña Merced contribute to the historical intrigue of the region, and some visitors to the Sycamore Inn claim to have felt an eerie presence, as if the unresolved nature of Raines's death still lingers. Today, the legacy of John Raines and Doña Merced is remembered not just through the Sycamore Inn, but also through the Raines House, a historic home in Rancho Cucamonga that was built by the couple in 1860. The house is now a museum, preserving the history of the area and the story of the Raines family. The tale of John Raines' murder, his wife Doña Merced's strength in the face of tragedy, and the connections to locations like the Sycamore Inn continue to capture the imagination of historians and paranormal enthusiasts alike. It's a story that encapsulates the volatile nature of life in the Old West, where wealth, power, and violence often intertwined. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, there's no denying that the Sycamore Inn has a history steeped in the kind of tales that spark the imagination, and it continues to be a place where the past feels palpably close. The Sycamore Inn in Rancho Cucamonga also has deep historical ties to the region. Established in 1848, this restaurant and inn has long been a gathering spot for travelers and locals alike. It's reputed to be one of Southern California's most haunted locations. Although not directly in Spadra, the Sycamore Inn is connected to the area's early pioneer history and offers a glimpse into the lives of the region's wealthy landowners, cattlemen, and adventurers. The Sycamore Inn was originally built as a way station for travelers on the old road between Los Angeles and San Bernardino. It became an important stop for people moving through the area. Today, it is still a functioning restaurant and maintains much of its old world charm, with legends of paranormal activity that further contribute to the region's mysterious aura. The Sycamore Inn, like many historical sites with roots in the Old West, has become a hotspot for paranormal enthusiasts. The stories surrounding the inn suggest that the energy of its past may linger in more ways than just memories. There have been multiple reports of ghostly apparitions spotted within the inn, particularly in its darker corners and quiet hallways. Some claim to have seen shadowy figures resembling cowboys or travelers from the 19th century. Given the inn's history as a stopover for outlaws, miners, and pioneers, many believe that these apparitions are spirits tied to the land and its violent, unpredictable history. Patrons and staff alike have reported feeling sudden drops in temperature, particularly near areas that were historically more active during the stagecoach days. These cold spots are commonly associated with paranormal activity. Some guests have described feeling an intense sensation of being watched or even a chilling presence nearby, especially in parts of the inn where people would have stayed overnight or gathered for meals in the past. Disembodied voices, footsteps, and the sound of furniture moving have all been reported by those working at or visiting the inn. Some describe hearing fake conversations or laughter, which could be residual energy from the bustling days when the Trailside Inn hosted travelers. These sounds often occur late at night when the inn is quieter, adding to the mysterious ambiance. The inn's connection to Old West lawlessness, particularly during its ownership by Uncle Billy Rubottom, contributes to the paranormal lore. Rubottom himself was involved in altercations that sometimes turned deadly, and given the Wild West's rough nature, the inn could have been the site of untold violence. In the 1800s, disputes were often settled with gunfights, leading many to speculate that some spirits connected to these violent acts may linger at the location. There are stories that Uncle Billy Rubottom himself haunts the inn. While Rubottom was a larger-than-life figure who was well-liked by many, he had a rough reputation, and his involvement in violent incidents is well documented. Some paranormal investigators believe his spirit may still roam the inn or surrounding areas, potentially trying to clear his name or relive his Wild West days. Though it's now a fine dining establishment, the Sycamore Inn's aura still captures its Wild West roots, which is why it remains a popular destination, not just for diners but for ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. Its eerie charm, combined with the rich historical backdrop of Rancho, Cucamonga, and Spadra, gives the inn a certain mystique that attracts those curious about the unknown. For years, I avoided visiting these historic places. I would drive by the Phillips mansion countless times, too scared to get any closer. It wasn't until recently that I mustered the courage to film it from just outside the fence. But my most intense experience came 2 years ago when I finally went to the Sycamore Inn for dinner with my family. The moment I stepped inside, I felt like I had entered a time machine. The dim lighting, old world charm, and historic pictures on the walls gave the place an unmistakably haunted vibe. The food was amazing, but something strange happened when we left. As we walked to my car, the headlights of my 2006 Acura suddenly turned on by themselves, which was odd because they only turn on manually. I was startled and I looked up to see where the headlights were pointing, and they were aimed directly at a gravestone. We drove over to check it out, and while it seemed to be a pet's grave based on the name, the unsettling feeling remained. With all the folklore and history surrounding the inn, I have no doubt there are numerous bodies buried in that area. Sadly, when I drove by again recently, I saw construction covering part of that ground, leaving me to wonder what secrets might now be lost beneath the development. The spirit world is very real, whether you believe in it or not. And when you begin to understand that time isn't linear but exists all at once, you can grasp how when a person who dies, especially under tragic or violent circumstances, can leave an energetic ripple or stain that lingers in this world, where they are unable to move on until they are ready to embrace the light. It's a kind of spiritual stagnation. Everything is energy, and spirits are drawn to the energy we put out. When you are in a low emotional state, or in places of fear or addiction, it's easier for negative entities to latch on to that energy. And conversely, when you raise your vibration by focusing on love, positivity, and healing, you connect with the higher, more benevolent forces of the universe. That's why I'm always talking about raising your energy and vibration. The spiritual realm responds to the energy you put out. If you dwell in darkness, you invite darkness. If you elevate your spirit, you attract light. My advice? Protect yourself by keeping your energy high, staying in positive emotional states, and avoiding actions or environments that lower your vibration. You never know what forces you might unintentionally invite into your life. Ultimately, the choice is yours. Choose the path of light, raise your vibration, and align yourself with the positive forces that will guide and protect you. Everything exists under God, the creator of the universe. I have a deep compassion for the darkness because the darkness simply just forgot about where it comes from, and more often than not just fell victim to bad circumstances in life, so chose the route of destruction and despair. For the longest time, I genuinely believed that I was perhaps cursed for just looking into things I shouldn't have, dabbling in the paranormal, and poking around where I wasn't meant to. I thought that it was possible, that it was affecting my life in subtle yet painful ways. However, as the years passed and I reflected on everything that had happened, my perspective shifted. What I once interpreted as curses or malevolent forces, I now believe were acts of protection. I've always felt like there's been a presence, something or someone watching over me, guiding me, and keeping me safe from harm. I don't know if this protection comes from guardian angels, spirit guides, or God, or even if it's just coincidence, but I know that these experiences were some of the strangest and most profound moments of my life. They've left me questioning the nature of reality, fate, protection, and the unseen forces at play. It's taken me 30 plus years of deep internalizing, research, reflections, and happenstance to come out with my beliefs about the nature of this world. It started with my interest in conspiracy theories, and the more you learn, the more you realize how little we actually know. But for me, everything kept reducing to this simple truth. This reality is more spiritual than anything else. And forget about religion for a minute. Religion causes too much division. I see spirituality as the ultimate truth, where it is available to all, no matter the circumstances. Light and dark forces are at war with each other behind the scenes. The way I see it, both sides are simply just doing their jobs, and this is precisely what makes this life such a beautiful, mysterious, and sometimes painful experience. But remember, with pain comes growth. Try not to get overwhelmed by all of the information and different belief systems. This reality just simply is what it is. Everything exists on a spectrum, parts of the whole, the good and the bad. The light and the dark are equal parts of the whole. They are not separate. We are all one.